If you're age over 50 and you're trying to get an owner-occupied property, which is a property to live in, make sure you include these details in your home loan application with your banker or your broker, because it will increase your home loan approval rate by 97%. Otherwise, you might get declined. Because this is what happens when you go for a home loan approval process in an ageist banking world. Let me repeat and underline, ageist. The banks will discriminate against your age. What happens is, you over here, which a lot of people call you a boomer, but I rather call you a respectable senior of society, has decided to buy a home to live in. So you might have been divorced before and you've sold some homes, or you might have been renting since you were 18, but you decided to get into the property market. So what happens is you go for a pre-approval, but then the bank that you apply for, which in my diagram is represented by a corporate greedy pig wearing boots, has decided that your age is inappropriate for their lending criteria because they're ageist. Because you're 50, right? How are we going to give you a 30-year loan? You're going to be 80 by the time you finish paying off this loan. You might have cocked it, right? So what happens is with their corporate ageist boots, they'll be stomping on your dreams. Your application is torn to pieces because they can't see a viable exit strategy. You're applying when you're 50. How do you plan to exit from your home loan? For example, if you decide to retire early before 80. A lot of applications I see that come to me or they've got declined from their previous broker and banker have a very weak exit strategy. When I take it over and represent that over 50 client, it gets approved because I have a formula to beat the bloody ageist bank. And I'll show you. This is my Venn diagram for the super exit strategy for my over 50 client to make sure this ageist pig approves the home loan approval for their property to live in. So what happened, there's three categories that you need to mention in your exit strategy. One of them is super. I'll explain further and I'll digress. Number two is a downsize. And number three is reduce loan term. So what happens is if you're naive enough to submit a pre-approval or a home loan approval without an exit strategy or a super exit strategy in this case, you will get stomped on by the corporate greedy pigs with their bloody stinky boots. To give you an example, if the property that you want to buy because you're sick of renting is about $800,000, you decided to get a home loan of $600,000, right? So what happens is the bank will question you, hey, you're 50 now, right? Your home loan is $600,000. If we approve you a 30-year home loan, that means by 80, if you technically are still working, you can pay off the home loan. But generally, people retire between 70, 75. How do you compensate that? Well, the first thing I'll highlight with my client is I'll ask them, how much is in your super balance at the moment? If they told me, hey, Q, I've got about 200K. So what happens is you need to include in your extra strategy. Right now, we're in 2024. Okay, the client has 200K. We're going to stipulate, also with the help of a financial advisor and an accountant, that by the time they retire, for example, 75 in the next 25 years, how much the super amount would be. Then through our home loan amortization calculator, for example, 600K, we then project by a time when the client is about 75, which is another 25 years, what the loan balance would be. So over here at 25, the loan balance would be at $189,000 owing. And then what I'll do in my discussion paper along with my pre-approval, the super extra strategy under super, I'll say, hey, the client's on 200K at the moment. By 25 years later, in their super, we project about 550K. Right now, their home loan is 600K, but they're paying principal and interest. So by the 25 years' time, the loan balance is 189K. And they have super of 550K. So there is a viable extra strategy. They'll use some of their super to pay down their home loan if they so decide to retire at 75 before 80 years old. Now, the reason I have three diagrams over here which overlap each other, because if you just use super loan in your exit strategy, the ageist bank is going to stomp on it. It's not enough. They'll say, hey, I don't want the client to rely on their super, which is their nest egg, to pay down their bloody home loan. All right. So what happens is I'm not going to give them a 30-year loan. I'll give them a bloody 15-year loan. And of course, you can't present this to the client who's over 50. Bloody hell, pay off my home loan in 15 years. The repayment is going to be huge, which means you're going to add a second category to your exit strategy, which is under downsizing. So in my discussion paper under downsizing, what I'll say to the bank is, well, the client's not going to rely entirely on the super to pay down the home loan. What they can do is they can downsize their current property. For example, if their current property is an $800,000 property in Sutherland, I'll say to them, look, based on the market in realestate.com, they can downsize to like a 1-bed apartment rather than a 2-bed apartment, and the property price is around $420 to $460. What happens then? I'll list down about 3 to 5 examples of how this client, if under stress, can downsize. I'll show them the current property and a list of different examples of how they can downsize and what that looks like to the bank. And my final argument to prove to the ageist bank over here to give my client a 30-year loan rather than a 15-year loan, or even declining the loan, is that I may accept a reduced loan term, but not a 15-year loan term. Maybe I'll accept a 25 to even 27-year loan term. That's if, for example, the client has a very low super. For example, the client migrated from an overseas country, and at the moment their super is only 20K. Or over here, they already bought like a 400K property, and they can't downsize anymore, right? So what happened is the last way to prove to the bank is, hey, the client can still service this loan on a 25-year loan term. I won't go under 25 years because the loan repayments will be disadvantageous for my clients in terms of repayments and cash flow. So guys, make sure you follow my super exit strategy, which covers super, downsizing, and reduction of long-term strategies. If you're over 50 and you're dealing with an ageist bank and you're trying to get approved for a home to live in because you're sick of renting, make sure you include this in your pre-approval. Don't just submit it without it, because you'll get yourself declined by this bloody corporate greedy pig over here. Remember, the banks will not prompt you to do it. They will not prompt your broker and banker to do it. You have one chance to submit your application. If it gets declined, it's declined. Jump in the comments. Let me know what you think.